The letter he never sent. A postman's final delivery. Welcome to Hearthside Stories 25, where every stitch, every tear, and every second chance comes to life. Pull up a chair, settle in, and let your heart listen. Because here we tell the stories that warm your soul and remind you what it means to be human. The autumn air in Maple Creek carries the scent of cinnamon and chimney smoke. Leaves crunch beneath boots, and the town's porches are dotted with pumpkins and rocking chairs. Frank Delaney, 68, tugs on his navy postal jacket one last time as he steps onto his familiar route. The same route he's walked for over 4 decades. Everyone knows Frank. He delivers more than just mail. He brings smiles, checks in on the widows, and always has a peppermint for the little ones. "Morning, Frank," calls out Mrs. Henderson from her rose-wrapped porch. He tips his hat and replies with a gentle smile. His thermos of black coffee is tucked under one arm, and his weathered mailbag, faded leather and fraying seams, is slung over his shoulder like it has been for 40 years. Today is different. Today is his last route. The town has planned a retirement gathering at the diner. There's talk of pie, old photos, and even a framed plaque. But Frank's not feeling celebratory. There's a heaviness in his chest, a whisper of something unfinished. As he approaches his last few stops, Frank pauses by the maple tree at the corner of Elm and 3rd, a place he and his son, Evan, used to race to when Evan was little. The memory washes over him like warm sunlight, then vanishes. That was a lifetime ago. Back home, Frank places the nearly empty bag on the kitchen table. He opens it to clean it out for the last time. Envelopes, receipts, a tiny-handed mitten from Mrs. Greer's toddler, all reminders of a life lived in quiet service. And then he sees it, a yellowed, crinkled envelope, wedged in the inner lining of the bag. His hands tremble as he pulls it out. The ink is faded but unmistakable. To Evan Delaney. Address: 912 Winding Hill Drive, Portland. Return: F. Delaney. Frank's breath catches. It's the letter he wrote 20 years ago, the apology he never sent after their last argument. The letter he never had the courage to mail. It's been sitting there all this time. He sinks into his chair, staring at it. In that moment, surrounded by silence and dust motes, Frank realizes something. This wasn't his final delivery. Not yet. Frank Delaney stares at the envelope in his calloused hands, its edges curled like the years he let slip by. His own handwriting stares back at him like a mirror, steady but full of what-ifs. The name Evan Delaney brings back more than just memories. It brings the ache of silence. It had been 20 years since Frank and his son last spoke. Their last conversation wasn't even a conversation. It was an explosion. Evan, then just 22, had packed his car, furious, after Frank refused to attend his graduation. Frank couldn't explain why. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear of feeling inadequate. Evan left with a slammed door and words that hit harder than fists. You were always more reliable to the neighborhood than to your own family. And just like that, Evan was gone. Frank had written the letter that night, in guilt and grief. He had meant to send it. But the next morning, duty called, packages to sort, people to greet, and somewhere between a delivery and a delay, the letter slipped away and stayed hidden for decades. In those years, Frank filled the silence with routine. Every Christmas, he hoped for a card. Every Thanksgiving, he set an extra plate. But the phone never rang. He kept up with Evan in roundabout ways. A mutual friend once mentioned he'd moved to Portland, married, had a daughter Frank had never met. And so, Frank watched families grow from the sidelines, helping others raise their children, celebrate birthdays, and mend fences, all while the fence between him and Evan grew taller. One cold January, Frank stood outside house number 46, the McClellans, where he used to watch Evan and their son play together. A snowman was melting by the mailbox. Frank stared for a long time before finally moving on. He aged in silence. His heart stiffened with each birthday missed, each milestone unknown. And though he never said it out loud, he carried the absence of Evan like a second mailbag, invisible but heavy. Now, staring at the letter he never mailed, Frank feels it all at once. The guilt, the years lost, the things left unsaid. The letter had waited for him. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. He checks the address. He's not even sure Evan still lives there. But something deep in Frank stirs. Not hope, not quite. Something quieter. A last chance. He folds the letter back into its envelope, smoother this time. Tomorrow, he won't be wearing a uniform, but he'll still deliver something. The words that might open a door, or at least unlock a heart. Frank Delaney had walked 1,000 routes in his life, but none had ever felt like this. This time, there was no uniform, no satchel. Just a folded letter in his coat pocket and a name in his heart. Portland, Oregon was nothing like his small Georgia town. The air smelled of pine and espresso. Cyclists zoomed past, and strangers barely looked up. But Frank wasn't here for sights. He was here for a son he hadn't seen in 2 decades. All he had was an address from a Christmas card he never received, forwarded to him years ago by an old neighbor. 234 Hawthorne Lane. The house was there, but the mailbox read Collins. Not Delaney. Frank knocked anyway. A woman in her 30s answered, curly hair, cautious smile. "Hi, can I help you?" she asked. He hesitated. "I'm looking for Evan Delaney. This used to be his address." The woman's eyes softened. "That's my uncle," she said. "They moved years ago, but I think I have his new address somewhere." "Wait here." While she rummaged through drawers, Frank stood still, afraid that breathing too hard might break the moment. She returned with a scribbled note. E. Delaney, Maplebrook School District Office. It wasn't much, but it was something. Frank spent the next few hours riding buses, asking questions. He walked the halls of a local school, spoke to a janitor who vaguely recalled Evan as the guy who handles community programs. At a community center bulletin board, he spotted a flyer. Local Dad's Music Hour, hosted by Evan D. Saturdays at 10 a.m., Maplebrook Rec Hall. His heart thudded. A Dad's Music Hour? The Evan he knew barely touched a guitar after high school. But this version, the one who ran community programs and hosted music hours, seemed like a man Frank had never met and desperately wanted to. He checked the calendar. It was Friday. That night, Frank stayed in a cheap motel with a flickering lamp and memories as loud as sirens. He sat at the window, gripping the letter. He had no idea what he would say, or if Evan would even show up. What if he'd moved on? What if the wounds ran too deep? But something told him to stay. This wasn't about rewriting history. It was about offering a line that could still be read. A thread to mend what had once unraveled. Saturday morning came with frost on the windows and a nervous churn in Frank's gut. He ironed his shirt twice, held the letter like it might fly away. Then he made his way to Maplebrook Rec Hall, standing quietly in the back as children circled up and a man, tall, confident, familiar, tuned a guitar. It was Evan. The same eyes, the same crooked grin when he laughed. Only now older, softer. And next to him was a girl about 10, light brown curls, eyes wide with wonder. She clapped along, looked up at Evan like he hung the moon. Frank stared, hands trembling. He had missed so much. But maybe, just maybe, he was right on time. The strumming of guitar, strings echoed gently through the community center as Frank lingered in the back, half hidden behind a stack of folding chairs. His eyes stayed fixed on Evan, his son, standing tall in front of a circle of kids, teaching them a folk song from decades ago. Evan's voice was calm, patient, full of ease, so unlike the boy Frank remembered, all clenched fists and unshed tears. But time had softened him, or maybe it had simply changed him. And the little girl at his side, she sang along, leaning against him like he was her anchor. Frank knew instantly, his granddaughter. He sat back down. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Back at the motel, Frank unfolded the creased paper he had carried for weeks, the letter he never sent. He had rewritten it a dozen times, but the words were still imperfect, still raw. Evan, I wasn't there when you needed me. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving space, giving time, but all I gave you was silence. If I could take back the years, I would. But today, I offer what I still have left, truth, regret, and the hope of one more hello. Your old man, Frank. He placed the letter in a new envelope, tucked in a photo from Evan's childhood, him at age 6, on Frank's shoulders after a county fair. Then he walked back to the rec center, The class had ended. Parents were collecting kids. Evan packed up the guitar. Frank approached slowly, watching him laugh with a girl, his daughter. He didn't interrupt. He just waited until Evan turned around and met his eyes. For a moment, time froze. Recognition flickered. Then confusion. Then something else like a question that hadn't yet formed. Frank reached into his coat and extended the envelope. "For you," he said, his voice trembling. "I should have brought it sooner." Evan stared at the letter. He didn't take it right away. Then, finally, he did. They stood in silence. Evan didn't say anything. Frank didn't expect him to. But as Evan's daughter tugged on his coat, "Daddy, who's that?" Evan answered quietly, "Someone I used to know." Frank nodded. "I'd like to change that, if it's not too late." Evan didn't invite him in. He didn't offer a hug, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he said, "I'll read it." And that was enough for now. Frank turned and walked toward the door. The air outside was cold, but his chest felt warm. For the first time in years, he had delivered something more than mail. He had delivered his heart. The next morning was soft with the golden hush of spring sunlight. Frank sat on a weathered bench outside the motel, sipping coffee from a paper cup, hands still rough from years of sorting envelopes and gripping handlebars. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts had been racing, caught between memory and hope. He wasn't sure if Evan would call, wasn't sure if anything would change. But somewhere deep in his chest, something had unclenched. By noon, Frank packed his bag. The letter had been delivered, the words had been said, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was running from something. Just as he stepped outside, a familiar car pulled into the lot. It was Evan. He got out slowly, no dramatic entrance, just quiet presence. In his hand was the letter, creased now, folded, reread. "You forgot to sign the back," Evan said with a half-smile, voice thick with something between pain and peace. Frank gave a short laugh, shaky, honest. Didn't think it'd matter after everything. Evan looked at him, long measuring. It did. Later, they sat together on the front porch of Evan's home. The same porch Frank had stared at just days earlier. The same porch he'd been too afraid to climb. Evan's daughter played on the front lawn, giggling as bubbles floated into the sunlight. Clara, Evan's wife, waved from the kitchen window. She didn't come out, not yet, but she didn't close the curtain either. Frank and Evan said very little. They didn't need to. A breeze picked up. Evan broke the silence. "You ever deliver a letter and not know what came of it?" Frank nodded. "All the time, but I always hoped it meant something." Evan looked toward the lawn. This one did. As evening crept in, Evan brought out his guitar. "Remember that tune you used to sing when I was little?" Frank blinked. He hadn't sung it in decades, but the melody returned like an old friend. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Evan joined in, and a little girl, twirling barefoot in the yard, sang too, off-key, joyfully. For the first time in a long while, Frank didn't feel like a postman delivering someone else's memories. He felt like he belonged. As the porch light flickered on, Frank leaned back, eyes on the stars beginning to appear. He had carried thousands of letters across hundreds of miles. But this one delivery, his last, meant more than all the rest combined. Because this time, the letter had found its way home. Thank you for spending time with us here at Hearthside Stories 25, where every story is a reminder that love still heals, hope still restores, and home is never too far away. Until next time, keep your heart open and your story burning bright.